Welcome back, nerds and nerdettes, to Bearstow's Barnstormers. Here we are into episode 3. We are back with the HKM kit. Mr. Barnstormer, why are we with the HKM kit? The last episode was with the HKM kit. Where's the Revell kit? Answer. The Revell kit's getting a lot of internal detail, and it's taking a considerable amount of time to do it in a way that I like it. So it's taken a little longer to progress. This one's not. I have footage for this one, so we're going to go ahead and show this one. Now, for the next 25 or so minutes, you guys are going to sit and watch me slowly paint my fingers. I'm just kidding. This video, I think, is a little bit longer than 25 minutes. But anyway, the point is here we are going to be working on the bomb bay. We're going to progress towards the radio operator's room, and we are going to progress to just the forward edge where the ball turret is located on the aircraft, on the ventral side. So right off the bat, you've seen me do the truss catwalk structure that goes across the bomb bay. Here is the actual mounting rail where the bombs are secured inside the bomb bay. And yeah, the B-17's bomb bay is interesting in the way that most other American World War II bombers are. The bomb bay takes up almost the entire cross-section of the aircraft. So from the top skin of the aircraft down to the actual bomb bay doors, just about, is a bomb bay. As a result, the bomb bay is very short, but very deep. Now, the comparison here would be like the Avro Lancaster, which has a very shallow but a very long bomb bay. We will build a couple of those later on. It's one of my favorite aircraft, if not my favorite aircraft. I will point out here, actually painting the bombs, I did originally use a different color of tester's paint, and it didn't come out very well, and that's what the splotchiness is. It only was on that one. And so we got it taken care of, and then just masked them up for a little bit of detail paint. They got a little bit yellow on the nose and the tails. Anyway, continuing the point, American bombers have very cavernous bomb bays, but they're very, very short. So the B-29 has 2 of them, I believe. The B-24's got a very large bomb bay. The B-25 does. You know, it's pretty ubiquitous throughout the American bomber fleet of World War II to have a very deep bomb bay, but very short. It's one of the reasons why the beginning of the Manhattan Project, and most of the way through it, they didn't have an aircraft that could actually carry the bombs. And so they looked at the Avro Lancaster to do that before eventually adopting the silver plate mod for the B-29, which allowed them to carry the weapons. Circling back to the footage you're seeing, I made my own decals for this, or for these bombs. There was none present in the HKM kit. And I wanted that little extra detail, the general purpose 500-pound bomb, which is what this is supposed to be, did have stenciling on it to indicate, lot number, mark it as an explosive. Because at the end of the day, right, there's dummy versions of this weapon, there's regular versions, and there is a requirement to label all of that in order to control configuration and be able to identify where it was manufactured, what time it was manufactured. That way, if there's a defect, they can go and go find them all. But anyway, so the B-17 had a bomb carrying capacity typically on a regular full length, duration and range mission of about 4,000 pounds. What's entertaining is when I was at the Pima Air and Space Museum last November, I met a B-17 pilot while I was there who joked that his F-4 Phantom in Vietnam was carrying more bombs under its wings than the B-17 was when he started flying for the Air Force, which is pretty entertaining just to see how far technology comes in such a short time, even if they are weapons of war. So 4,000 pounds for a regular or for a longer duration, longer range mission. That's pretty much the normal of what they were carrying. Up to 8,000 pounds internally, and then we had external stores. Here you can see this is the upper structural kind of roof over the bomb bay. It gives the area a lot more structural strength to be able to handle that much weight strapped into the middle of the aircraft. This is a first for me as well as doing the decals previously. This is the first time I've ever done chipping. So we're starting with, the Alclad primer is noted, the Alclad aluminum paint, and then moving on, I applied an ammo/MIG heavy chipping fluid, and then put in a Tamiya olive green paint shortly after applying the chipping fluid. And then once that's done, I did a short on this as well, but once that's done, all essentially you have to do is then agitate it, right? So just interfere with it. A wet toothbrush, I've heard, is a very good thing. I've seen people use toothpicks. I personally went and used a Q-tip right here. And that was enough. It was enough to take the paint off and just give it a little bit of a worn appearance. So yeah, I'd never done this before. It was a brand new technique for me. I love the way it came out. In hindsight, I wish I'd painted a little bit more of the internal parts of the aircraft in that aluminum first and then done the chipping method. I thought it looked really good. Here we're putting a little bit of panel line wash, but anyway, continuing. So, for those of you that are unaware, range and payload coincide for these aircraft, right? So, this aircraft is designed to carry a specific payload for a specific range. Any additional payload requires the pilot to then increase the angle of attack of the aircraft. Angle of attack being how nose high or nose low the aircraft is, so rotating on that axis. Your direction of travel obviously is forward in flight. So as you pitch up, you generate more lift because you are creating more pressure underneath the wing, and higher pressure under the wing means more lift. So what also gets generated there is a bunch of drag. So the more load you have in the aircraft, the higher that nose needs to be, the more drag there is, which means, now you're creating a net negative force on the aircraft's forward-backwards motion. The engines are compensating for that. So the result is, if you want to maintain speed, you then have to increase fuel flow to the engines in order to create enough thrust to continue your moving forward at the speed you want. More fuel, less range. That's how it works. So there's your 5-second entry to aerodynamics as far as payload is concerned. From reference photos, I did look and find pictures of and video of Texas Raiders' internal features, colors, whatever, what have you. The catwalk was coated in an anti-skid black coating, so that's what we're going to go ahead and do here. And move on from there. So the B-17, a lot of the times you'll see them with cutaways that show a couple 500-pound bombs on the internal bomb mounting rail. Bomb mounting rail, of course, is what you can see in the instructions in the top left of your screen right here. And you can see the cutaways with like the 500-pound stack. And then on the outboard side, you also have essentially a rail, mounting rail for more weapons. So I've seen a couple different configurations and cutaways. I've seen, a couple 1,000-pound bombs, 2,000-pound bombs, 250-pound bombs, huge variety of range as far as what weapon you could put where. The B-17 also, interestingly enough, had an underwing pylon attachability. So if they wanted to carry more than the 8,000 pounds they could mount internally, they could also exercise that option, right? But again, your trade-off is now you're increasing drag because you're putting another surface into the aerodynamic flow around the aircraft, which means you need to burn more fuel. So you're only really carrying that for really short ranges. And there are pictures out there of it, but it was not super common to do that. I will say that during the mount up of the HKM bombs into the bomb bay, onto the mounting rails, the fins have to overlap in a certain way, otherwise it doesn't fit super well. I didn't initially notice that until I was trying to put them on, and then I realized, hang on a minute, this is a little bit more complicated than I would like. The instructions does have a layout in it, and that layout actually does work, so it's not just somebody fudging a CAD model to make it close. It actually did successfully mount the bombs onto that rail, and was repeatable, right? So I did it on the left-hand side and the right-hand side. I will also note, for anybody doing this, I didn't make this mistake, for the record. I'm telling you in advance, I did not make this mistake. because I was careful. Pay attention to which way around your bombs are. Most of these parts look symmetric, with the exception being that central catwalk truss that goes across the bomb bay. They look symmetric. They are not. And so the result is, if you don't pay attention and you rush through this part and you don't compare it to the instructions or the way the aircraft's laid out, you may find yourself with the oopsie of having the bombs mounted backwards. So just pay attention to that, and that is my advice to you. I was very, very careful about it. Some other advice is the upper structural piece that you saw me chip a little bit earlier. There are pass-through holes on the forward and aft bulkhead. You can actually see it right there above the flight control cables that I am now painting. The tabs on that structural mounting piece, or that structural mounting reinforcement, whatever you want to call it, the roof of the bomb bay, if you will, don't cut them off. Don't sand them off like a certain someone who is currently speaking in this video did, which made it a lot harder to mount that part. Anyway, you've been warned. Just be careful on that. I don't know if it wasn't me paying attention or at what point I removed them or if I just sanded them off. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find that in the footage. At some point I did, and because of that I lost my mounting device, and it was a little bit harder to just position and mount it, but it's fine. Here we are painting some more of the details, some electrical cables. I will say that flight control cable wise, the B-17 is pretty interesting because there's exposed flight control cables all over the place throughout the fuselage. Most of the across the roof, kind of, if you're standing facing forward in the aircraft, it's usually like the 11 o'clock or 1 o'clock position where your flight control cables are. And again, remember, this is a fully mechanically controlled aircraft. There is no hydraulic boosting of the flight control cables. It is entirely bicep and tricep. And of course your rudder cables for your feet, so quads and hamstrings and whatnot. But anyway, the point is, there are flight control cables going across there and in the real thing. So I went ahead and I actually drilled out the bulkhead. You'll see that in a little bit when I'm done having the aft bulkhead the complete opposite way around for where it's supposed to be. There we go. Thank you, Mr. Barnstormer. You fixed it. So I did drill out that aft bulkhead and attach some flight control cables just for a little bit more realism. I don't anticipate picking this aircraft model up when it's finished very often. It'll probably happen because I do it with the 909 kit every now and then. But interestingly enough, mostly since I started building these, as I'm just looking at what I did previously as a reference. But I don't intend to pick it up very often. I don't know if I'll mount it on a mirror or anything so you can see underneath or see up into the bomb bay from underneath. That may be a good thing I do in the future, but it's definitely not in the intention right now. Either way, I just wanted to add that little bit of detail. I thought it was pretty cool, and I don't think you'd be able to see it from outside. So again, going back to think about what you're doing as far as what you can see in the model kit before you do it, because you may be disappointed down the road if you can't see a certain feature you're really proud of that you put a lot of effort into on the inside, and then you close it up and you can't see that area of the aircraft anyway. And it also could save you doing some extra work that you may not want to do, but you're pushing yourself to do it for the detail. But anyway, so here we are closing up the bomb bay. All the fit was fantastic. I had no complaints about it. Everything was perfect. Even without the mounting tabs, it was still easy to get that upper piece on. The bomb rails fit perfectly. The bombs fit inside perfectly. There was no collisions or anything. Yeah, here we go. So it did take me a while to drill through this, I will admit. And I am showing all of it sped up, I think, 3 or 4 times. I think my drill bit was just a little bit dull, and that's what was causing the issue. It felt like forever.
One eternity later.
Eventually, though, we did get through it, or I did get through it, and I used regular standard thread. I've seen people use like steel wire, really small gauge steel wire. I think in the future that's the way I'll go, but for right now this is fine with me. And I just ran a couple of these back and forth, replicating different cables. Again, the distance between these cables and the actual aircraft's less than an inch. So we're talking 72 scale, or 48 scale, excuse me. So a 48th of an inch is pretty small, right? So I didn't really want to have to try and position these out 20 thousandths of an inch relative to each other thereabouts. So right next to each other was fine as long as they weren't tangled up. It actually looks pretty good, and you'll see it a little bit later. Or you see one later. I didn't do a video for all of them. I thought that was a little repetitive. So here we are doing the floor of the radio operator's area. I am going to do a little bit of a dumb here, but it'll make sense in the long run, and it's not a big impact, which is why I did it. So I know it's going to look weird. Just go with me. But anyway, I will make a comment here because it's something that I didn't catch until later. On the radio set on the left of the screen here, you can see a triangular structure on the side of it. I didn't realize this at the time. I have since realized it and corrected it. That's not part of the radio. That's the shelf that the radio sits on. And it's either an aluminum finish, or I've seen a couple that are wooden finishes. So they're not black is what I'm getting at. And, go ahead and make sure you note that, just if you're worried about that level of detail. I've already fixed mine. I'm done mine in wooden finish, and it looks a lot better that way. It's just another detail that you can get. There is, I believe, a window right next to the radio operator, so you can see that area. And even if you can't, you should be able to just about see it. Not through the waist turret. No, there is a window. Yeah, there's a window, so you can see that area. But anyway, yeah, so I put it down and immediately just transferred paint onto the floor, but it's okay because that area is also a wooden finish, and I'm going to use my little technique to get a roughly wooden finish down, as I'm currently doing here on the radio operator's desk. Unfortunately, I put a little bit too much of the tester's paint down, and it ended up being a little thicker than I wanted. Not a big deal. I'll go back with some sandpaper and just hit it to take off the sheen, because it did come out a little glossy, and these weren't exactly varnished tables, so I'm going to go down and knock it down a little bit, and that'll make it look a little better. I did get a comment on a previous video about hand brushing versus airbrushing. So to circle back to that, the advantages here of hand brushing all of this is I'm doing relatively small areas. And where airbrushing gets really useful is when you're doing a larger volume, or a larger surface area, excuse me. So here, as long as I'm thinning the paint, it's going to come out with just about the same surface finish. It may take me 1 or 2 layers to get it to be relatively even, but it is going to work out just about the same. Here I am dry brushing. So to talk and expand on dry brushing a little bit, what I've done is I've taken some of the paint, in this case the Tamiya Sky Gray, and I've just dabbed the paintbrush into it. I've then taken a paper towel and I've transferred as much of the paint off of the paintbrush as possible, to the point that it's just about stopped transferring any paint whatsoever to like the paper towel, paper tissue, whatever. And what that means is that paint's, there's not a whole lot of active paint on the paintbrush, but it will hit any of the three-dimensional features just a little bit harder than it hits the rest of the part. So as you sweep that paintbrush quickly across the part surface, it'll leave a little bit of the other paint color on the raised features, and it gives you really, really good three-dimensional effect. And so that's what I was doing there. Feel free to back the video up and go check that out. While you're checking that out and you're interrupting the flow of the video, go ahead and pause it, scroll down, pop that subscribe button if you want. You don't have to. I'm asking you to, though. But either way, there's 100 people that are now subscribed to the channel. That's fantastic. And if that means that I've helped 100 people do this kind of thing, then that makes me pretty ecstatic, and I'm absolutely here for it. But anyway, then feel free to continue watching the dry brushing section again. So here, we just finished up, or I just finished up doing the kind of wooden trick that I do. And I may hit that before I put it up and close it up into the aircraft. I may hit that with a little bit of staining just to dull it down a little bit. I think it came out pretty well. It looks nice and worn, which is what I was going for. And it looks pretty wooden as far as I'm concerned. Obviously it's hard to replicate grain structures at 48th scale, so I'm not too concerned about it. And I think it'll look good from the outside of the aircraft peeking in a really, really small window. I will caution, as I did the last time on the Bombardier position on the Revell kit, be careful of the paint you're using. So I'm using a thinner to spread that brown around on top of the black and kind of poke holes in it to make it look a little run through and get some of the underlying texture and tone in from the black paint. Again, be very careful that you're not using two of the same types of paint, so you're not mixing acrylic with acrylic or enamel with enamel, because when you put that thinner down, it will start intermixing, which, that can give a great effect as well. I really like the way that the Bombardier's position came out, but just be aware of it and plan for it accordingly. Once that thinner hits it, it will thin both if they're the same type. So here is the mount for the ball turret. I did not build the turret in this part, and I actually still have not built the turret. The mount is an aluminum finished part, so we're just going ahead and doing the standard recipe for Alclad. We're putting down a nice black primer layer, which really makes the aluminum color pop on top of it, and I really like the way it comes out. I will say that using the Alclad more frequently lately has built my confidence to eventually tackle my 48 scale B-29 that I have. I almost broke it out 3 years ago when Chuck Yeager died, because the version I'm going to do is the B-29 that dropped the Bell X1, because I've also got one of those in 48 scale. Yeah, I ultimately decided I had enough projects going on at the time. I had an F-18 that I was building. I had the A-10, obviously. I had enough going on. So I will get to that B-29 eventually. I've got quite a few bombers to knock out. And there's a couple of aircraft I want to build between now and then just to get some variety in. But doing the Alclad more frequently has really built my confidence to do that. So stay tuned. It'll happen. Here, I will caution you, be careful with X-Acto blades. They are very sharp. If I have one complaint about the HK models kit here, it's that some of the injection molded tabs that are remaining after the process are a little hard to get to and a little hard to knock down. Scraping an X-Acto blade over these ones worked out just fine. The upper structural beam as part of the bomb bay, you'll notice there were some there. I just couldn't get to them short of getting a rotary tool and a grinding bit, which was unfortunate, but that's the way the kit is. As we start to close up and wrap up here, got about a minute to go, so if you're still here, stay with me. I did not have all the footage of the installation of this part, the radio set, into the back of the front of the aft bulkhead of the radio room. Sorry, front of back. It's a little confusing. So I didn't have the footage of that. It wasn't very in focus, and as a result, I didn't want to go ahead and I didn't want to put it in this video. But you can see it there. It's installed. Top tip: the manual cranks for the landing gear manual deployment are right above it, so that's a kind of neat feature. Yeah, right there. But anyway, here's the finished product. If you stuck around this long, thank you. Feel free to like, subscribe, leave me a comment, critique me, whatever you want to do. I'm happy to engage with anyone on how to do this a little bit better. Thank you all, and I will see you in the next one.